We're back with more Seattle Real Estate Radio with your hosts, Christian Nossum and Dan Keller.
All right, hey, welcome back to Seattle Real Estate Radio here on KKOL 1300 Business Radio. Just a quick reminder, we're here every single Monday from 3 to 4, and Saturdays we're having our rebroadcast from 5 to 6. So good opportunity to learn more about not only this show isn't about the home buying process, but it's about the journey of home ownership. It is. You know, and one of the things that we really focus on is bringing in guests that help our clients, our past clients. When Christian and I set out and built out Seattle Real Estate Radio, it was really an information portal so that we could help every single one of our current clients, future clients, and past clients better navigate through the home ownership experience. And so, you know, one of our guests today, really excited to talk with Kathleen Royer. She is a divorce mediator, correct?
That's right.
Yes.
Northwest Family Mediation.
With Northwest Family Mediation. And, you know, unfortunately, this is perfect timing for myself. We're doing a lot of refinances right now. I'm in mortgage, and I'm going to be talking about mortgages here in a minute, so I do need to throw out a disclosure. My MLO number is 115349. But you know, we're seeing a lot more applications come through our office, unfortunately, that are as a result of families splitting. So this is great timing. I want to give kind of our listeners a heads up. Who is Kathleen? What does she do? And so Kathleen is a divorce mediator. She began practicing family law in Seattle in 1992. Kathleen offers divorce and family mediation to effectively and efficiently resolve all aspects of divorce, including child custody and parenting, post-degree modifications, and complex property matters. Kathleen has completed substantial professional mediation training, including specialized training in parent-teen mediation and conflict resolution.
Well, thank you for joining us, Kathleen.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, divorce, it happens a lot in the U.S., United States. Why don't you go ahead and tell us that fact? When do people tend to get divorced?
Oh, well, you know, it's interesting that the UW has just put out a study. So most of those of us who have been working with families in a divorce context, either as a mediator or as an attorney, know that there are sort of seasons of divorce. And so this has been anecdotal information that, you know, typically for divorce attorneys, their phones start ringing off the hook January 2nd. And now what happened is that these UW researchers have just put out a report, and they've identified that the peak times for filing for divorce are August and March, and they're essentially tied to, and this is what we know, is that they're tied to nobody wants to divorce during the holidays. They want to get through the holidays, and then often that New Year's resolution is, I'm doing something different. And they also want to get through the summer holidays or the summer vacation, family vacation, and get the kids more or less back to school before they make a major transition.
Wow.
So it's funny, now they've actually graphed that. So, you know, that stuff that we all knew in practice was happening, you know, scientists have confirmed that for us.
Interesting. So for listeners who don't know, there's a difference between a divorce attorney and a divorce mediator.
That's correct.
So define your role as a divorce mediator and the difference between an attorney.
Well, you know, the difference, so many attorneys are mediators. I practiced family law until 2010, which is when I transitioned to a mediation-only practice.
Okay.
What a divorce attorney does is the divorce attorney will offer legal advice and file documents and draft documents and represent clients in the context of an adversary proceeding.
Okay.
Now, I think it's important to know that for every couple who wishes to divorce in the state of Washington, they do have to file with the court, you know, file a petition with the court that tells the court they want the court to enter a decree of dissolution. Okay. The question really is, how do you want to participate in getting to or navigating the court's expectations to get that decree in front of it?
Okay.
Very few people really go to trial. Most people resolve their cases without a trial. Okay. And they do that by engaging in some sort of negotiation or alternative dispute resolution. So the question is, do you want to do that sooner rather than later?
Right.
So a divorce mediator really comes on board as early as possible to help the couple navigate that process and navigate and make all the agreements, the substantive agreements that are necessary to be incorporated into final court orders to be presented to the court.
Okay. All right. Cool. So, So let me ask you this. Do you have to file a divorce before you go through the mediation process?
No, and that's a great question, because in when you file for a divorce, there's a 90-day waiting period that has to lapse before either party can enter final orders. And so that timing and adjusting your own expectations around that 90-day waiting period are something that you actually can navigate in the context of mediation and talk about, okay, when are we going to actually file? That can have a lot to do with, for example, refinancing.
Okay.
Right? What's the timing of that refinancing?
Right.
Sometimes, and you can maybe answer this, Dan, it's my understanding that for some couples, if there actually is any kind of litigation pending, and that can include a divorce petition, that can affect an interest rate potentially.
Yeah.
And so there are real good reasons to look at navigating what's that refinance piece going to be before you actually file that legal.
That's the best advice. Either do it before or do it after, but don't do it during the middle. Don't do it in between, because just the paperwork and then waiting for stuff from each party is time consuming, and you only have a certain amount of time when you lock in interest rate. So yeah, you're right.
Right, and so mediation is a really good process to really sit down and look at what are the options that the couple has in terms of how the house is going to be addressed.
Okay. Are there any benefits to using mediation for making decisions involving real estate?
Well, there are absolutely, because when you simply put the question of what to do with the house in front of a trial court, the trial court's limited in terms of the remedies that it can order. And commonly, it's more or less limited to, is the house going to be awarded to one party or the other, or is the house going to be sold?
Okay.
And those are very limited options. In mediation, you have the opportunity to really explore what are the options, what are all your options, and what option will maximize the benefit to both parties. And that's really kind of the heart and soul of mediation, is how do you maximize the benefit that each can receive from the resources that you have available to you of the marriage, whether that's retirement accounts or real estate or savings accounts or investment accounts, whatever those might be.
Okay. Let's talk about child custody. I know that's a big one.
Yeah.
So how does that play a role in what happens to a couple's real estate? I've had a situation, well, I haven't had a situation, but I've heard a situation where a couple divorced and they wanted to keep the property and possibly put it in the child's name, but the child probably wasn't of legal age. How does that work?
Well, so let's start with the notion that every family is unique.
Okay.
And so that's so mediation actually is a really good process to simply look at the uniqueness of each family.
Okay.
And mediation gives the couple the opportunity to look at what are the best options. Again, if we go back to this notion of how do we really maximize, I have to say that there are some misconceptions out in the community about that if I stay in the house, I get to be the primary parent. I mean, there's a lot of kind of urban myths about child custody.
Okay.
We really are in a phase in family law where there is much more shared parenting, and so really sort of staking out turf with the house is really not quite the. It really isn't the answer. It's more figuring out, what does parenting really look like, and to the extent that one party or the other can remain in the house, what is that going to look like? How is that going to be financed?
Okay.
And does the person who wants to remain in the house have the capacity to finance?
Yeah.
And so that's often a big question.
So what do you think about that, Dan?
As far as, that's it's a big topic of conversation, because when somebody does get it, we got to look at the, alimony or child support, and which can be used to qualify for a mortgage. But are you talking about qualifying for the home after divorce? Is that the question?
Right.
Yeah. It's a big part of it. A lot of the times, I'm just going to be honest with situations that I've seen, that's not the issue.
Okay.
We have working families and they're splitting assets. It's essentially what they're doing. He or she gets the house, he or she doesn't, and they're doing a cash out to either pull money out of there to settle. So that's kind of but it's a huge point. If somebody you have to show the ability to afford that new mortgage on your own without being married.
Right.
So without joint income.
Right. So, Kathleen, let me ask you, what's the most difficult part in the mediation process? Like, what during the whole
in terms of dealing with the real estate?
real estate? Yeah. What's the most difficult part?
Well, I think certainly in terms of dealing with the real estate, I think it's very difficult in a situation where there's a high emotional attachment to the property,
Right.
And a limited capacity to maintain the property independently. Those are the most difficult situations.
Okay.
But I think it's important to know that for families that are going through divorce, there are some really specific steps that need to be taken into consideration. So, for example, all the assets and liabilities need to be disclosed.
Okay.
The parties need to figure out what's the value of all of those things. They have to figure out how are those things characterized, and then they have to figure out how can we make the best allocation of those resources and those assets and liabilities.
Okay.
So that they're workable for the parties. There's a standard out there that most people can articulate, this fair and equitable standard. But, honestly, it's about in mediation figuring out it's pretty common that people will not agree on what's fair, but they can definitely agree on what's workable for them.
Right.
And that's the goal of mediation, is how do we come to a workable arrangement?
Right.
And so the house is one of those pieces.
Okay.
Right. But what happens, I think, is that because it's such an insecure time when couples divorce, there becomes somewhat of a land grab. So people will start saying, well, I'm going to take this, and I'm going to take that, and I'm going to take, this, without really walking through, okay, wait a minute, what is there that we have to even discuss?
Right.
How do we see it valued? How do we see a workable allocation of those things? So mediation lets people slow down, take stock of what they have, and figure out how can we allocate it so that everybody's needs are met.
Right.
And that's when you look at that process compared to an adversary process like court. Court really is about asserting your rights and applying remedies.
Right.
And that's not a great system for families, because families really, when they're in transition, they need to be able to problem solve.
Right.
And just simply asserting your rights doesn't really invite that.
Right. Definitely. Okay. So
This is great. This is great info. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, my turn to ask a few questions. But this was super helpful. So stay tuned. We'll be back here in a few minutes. And I'm looking forward to talking more with Kathleen.
Thank you.
We're back with more Seattle Real Estate Radio with your hosts, Christian Nossum and Dan Keller.
welcome back. All right, this is Seattle Real Estate Radio on KKOL 1300 AM. We are back with Kathleen Royer, divorce mediator with Northwest Family Mediation. Welcome.
Thank you.
You've got your deep, less is more, late night voice going. You got a good radio voice, man. I'm telling you, Christian, you might be out of job when you get back from your little road trip. So, no, this is great. This is something like I was telling you earlier.
Right.
Unfortunately, I see all too much of it. It's a part of my job.
Mm-hmm.
It's a part of what I do, helping families purchase homes. And unfortunately, life happens and
Absolutely.
divorce happens. And so.
And I haven't come across it yet, but
you know,
at some point.
I was going to ask you, have you dealt with any clients that have called you and said, "Hey, unfortunately, we're
not yet,
no.
but I'm pretty sure down the line it will happen."
I know just this last year it's happened to Christian a few times. So,
Mm-hmm.
and there were people that we both helped purchase homes. So,
wow.
One of the things that I really wanted to talk with, I want to get kind of into the nitty gritty around homeownership and divorce. So, Kathleen, I'm curious, as many of our listeners I'm sure are too. So, when couples are getting divorced, do they generally sell the property right away? Do they come to you first, or are they trying to go to the real estate professional first? What do you see most often?
Well, here's what I see, and what I encourage my clients to do is to really think first and act after that.
Okay.
Right. And so I think that it's really, there are a lot of financial questions that have to be resolved in a divorce. And so I think that there may be pressure from one party to the other party as to selling a home really quickly, but sometimes that may or may not make the most sense.
Got it.
And so I think that for families, more often than not, that's where that resistance is one party may want to sell, the other party says, no, I don't want to sell right away, I want to figure it out. And so it really is a matter of slowing it down and walking through what the options are.
Okay.
As I said earlier, what you don't want to have is a situation that essentially, at least to one party, appears as a land grab.
Sure.
Because that only adds more instability to the process and more conflict to the process.
Okay. So then, let's say you're working with a client, and they're getting a divorce, and they're selling their house. Do the proceeds go into escrow, and they're held until you're finished, or is it just a part of the mediation process?
That absolutely depends.
Okay.
So one of the things about it really is how do you choreograph that sale so that it's as seamless as possible.
Got it.
So many folks will construct very specific agreements about what the property sale is going to look like. That's a very common thing that happens. It depends really on the level of trust and cooperation between the couple. For most couples who are engaged, who self-select and come to mediation as their process, they typically are committed to working together. They're committed to finding workable solutions, and really they use mediation to that end, and then craft agreements that support the sale of property as that needs to be, that supports any other division of assets and resolution of debts that they have.
Got it. Okay. You make it sound smooth, which and I know divorce is not, but you make it sound a lot more simplified than I would have thought. I just, going off of experience where I've seen friends or past clients, both lawyer up, and then they get in this battle, and it's back and forth, and I'm like, guys, I'm not going to talk with you. Well, sometimes I have no choice.
Right.
I've got to talk with, one spouse and their party, and the other spouse and theirs, and then I get caught in the middle, and it doesn't make my job any easier at all. So
emotions are really high.
Yeah.
Right.
So sounds like, I'm again, glad we had you on, because it's this mediator. Just the word mediate actually is a peaceful word, if you will,
Right.
but much more simplified than dealing with two lawyers.
Well, what it is that so when people walk into court, court is an adversary process. Right, it's a process where I think we maybe spoke a little bit about that in the first half, about that the court system is a system that really is about identifying your rights, asserting your rights, and then potentially having the court apply a remedy for a right that has been violated or abridged, or however. But anyway, but so that. Sometimes families need that.
Yeah.
But most families don't need that. Most families really simply have to do what is a big math problem called how are we going to divide the property and assets.
Yeah.
And the way to do it is to sit down and figure out how are we going to not only do the math but show our work.
Yeah.
Right? It's really, so it's a matter of taking the adversary, it's all my rights. I have a right to this. I have a right to that. Let's talk about that in the context of the real work that you have to do to move forward beyond the divorce, and that's particularly true when couples have children.
Well, I had a question that just kind of came. I don't want to go way off on a tangent, but this could transition into one of my next questions that I had for you. So, when would it make sense to then enter into court and in each couple have a representation?
Well, that's a great question.
Yeah.
So, I do, when I work with couples, before I start working with them, I offer a conference call as a sort of meet and greet call to decide, to help the couple decide if mediation is a good fit for them.
Okay.
And mediation is not a substitute for understanding the legal rights and obligations that you have to one another by virtue of your marriage and your children in common.
Right.
And so attorneys can play a really critical role in helping identify where are those legal questions. They typically lie in valuation of property or other property and debts. They typically lie in characterization of debts and assets. those are legal questions that need to get resolved
Okay.
in terms of how those particular pieces affect an overall property distribution. So attorneys can come in on a consulting basis in mediation to help couples understand, what their legal rights and obligations are, which they may not want to assert for the purpose of coming to an ultimate settlement.
Okay.
But it's really a matter of making informed agreements. And when you make informed agreements, those tend to be durable agreements. So that's where, attorneys come into that as part of the process. And they can also support the couple in terms of filing and drafting the necessary court documents in the process, which are the petition and then the petition and supporting documents to open the action, and then the decree of dissolution and a parenting plan, order of child support if those are needed to conclude the matter. But really, there are only 2 points where the court actually needs paperwork from the parties, and that's 2 main points. That's to open the action and to close the action. The process you engage in all the way in between there is what you choose. And so if you want to take a path where you control the outcome, mediation is the process in which you do that. If you want to hand the decision-making to a third party who doesn't have information about you, your values, and your interests, take it to court.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
So that's really the biggest difference, is that the couple makes the decisions in mediation.
Okay. So, as far as, this is kind of where I come into play with mortgage debt, talk to us about mortgage debt. How is that typically, in your experience, resolved during a divorce?
It's very commonly resolved that the debt goes with the person who has awarded the property. That's just a pretty common general rule. Okay. So so that sort of ties to then how is that going to really look? Yeah. So, the very common situation is where, one party says, well, I'd like to remain in the house and I'll take the mortgage debt. But then the party who's not taking the house, if they've taken that mortgage debt in both their names, that party who is no longer an owner of the property but still on the mortgage is going to typically make a request that the mortgage be refinanced so that they don't have that obligation and they can move on to purchase another property without that encumbrance. And so
I've seen this happen way too much where, and maybe it's just a lawyer not dotting I's and crossing T's, where somebody comes to apply for a mortgage with me and we do the mortgage planning pre-qualification process, and they tell me that these are what my debts are and here's my income, and I'm like, okay, great, I'd like to verify that. Let me run your credit and then let me see your income documents. We run their credit and there's a mortgage on there for $350,000 and $2,200 a month payment. And I say, hey, unfortunately, you've got this debt. Was this sold? Was it recently sold? Oh, no. That was part of a divorce 3 years ago, and that's my husband's. And he got it in the divorce. And I'm like, well, you still got it because it's still on your credit. You're still on the note. If your husband were to default, you're going down. Your credit's going down as a result of that. And then all of a sudden there's a freak out session. They're calling it back up. And they just don't take care of things. So whether the husband at the time just chose not to refinance or whatever, or just forgot or got lazy, but I see that a lot.
Well, and oftentimes, so there's a very big percentage of folks who are divorcing who want to avoid attorneys at all costs, and they somewhat do that to their own disadvantage in that regard, because that's one of the roles that attorneys have, is in helping their clients understand all the legal implications of these property transfers and getting all those I's dotted and T's crossed. And so, I don't know if in that circumstance there actually was an attorney involved or not, but it's really a matter of how do you really work through all those details. When you're in a process that allows you to not be calling names or getting into a conflict narrative, we call it. You really have the time to sit down and work through those details. That's one of the other benefits of mediation, is you really do get to just look at all of this methodically.
So in our last couple of minutes, I would love for you to kind of give our listeners, and myself too, kind of just an overview of the difference between mediation and, I guess, the court fight, which is typically what we see. What's the big difference there?
Well, again, I think the biggest difference is who's controlling the outcome.
Okay.
And from my chair, I think it's much healthier for couples to control their own outcome. Because, once a court makes a decision, it's done. And the parties have to live with the decision, or they can engage in more conflict, appealing and doing whatever they think they need to do. But court really isn't about winning and losing. In fact, when I very first started practicing, after, a couple of family law motions, I realized this is not about winning and losing. This is about losing and losing worse, potentially. And those are not good odds.
No.
So when I practiced family law, I really tried to help my clients engage in effective problem solving that addresses their future, not their past. And that's probably the biggest difference, is that a court can only really look at past.
Yeah.
It really keeps both parties tethered to the past. Mediation lets you plan your future.
Nice. So if you're listening or you're watching this on a replay and you want to have a conversation with Kathleen, you have an initial consultation that is...
I do, yeah.
Okay, and that's free of charge, just to have
That's correct,
you're not going to charge for an initial phone call?
That's
okay.
correct.
Great. So I'm going to give our listeners a little bit of heads up. We're running out of time right now, but when we come back, I'm going to give you a little overview on your business, how to get a hold of you, and we just really want to thank you for your time and coming in.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
It's been a
this was
pleasure.
this is very helpful. Yeah, real helpful. So stay tuned. We'll be back here in a few minutes, and we'll talk a little bit more divorce, and we'll get into the Mortgage Minute.